Henry Jackson stepped into Prestige Auto Gallery in downtown Atlanta, his worn leather shoes scuffing the polished marble floor. At 68, he wore a frayed khaki jacket and faded slacks from his years as a mechanic, quietly admiring the sharp lines of the fiery red Lamborghini Aventador SVJ Roadster in the center of the showroom. His silver hair fell messily over his forehead. As he leaned closer, his calloused hands, etched with decades of labor, brushing the air as if to feel the car. Ethan Brooks, the sales manager, stood a short distance away, scanning Henry from head to toe with thinly veiled contempt. "Sorry," he said with a mocking tone, gesturing toward the door with an arrogant flourish, "but I think you're in the wrong place. These cars are for real buyers with money, not for someone like you to gawk at for fun." Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. A few nearby employees snickered, while wealthy customers, some with gold rings, others clutching designer bags, turned to look, their curiosity tinged with disdain. Henry felt his cheeks flush, but he stayed silent, his deep brown eyes flickering with a hurt he tried to hide. He walked out of the showroom without a word, his pride keeping him upright, despite the weight in his chest. The next day, a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom would roll up to Prestige Auto Gallery, the early sunlight glinting off Atlanta's most luxurious street, making the dealership's facade even more dazzling. Supercars, Ferrari, Bentley, Porsche, and Lamborghini, sparkled behind pristine glass, whispering promises of a lavish world reserved for the elite. Amid this scene, Henry Jackson, an elderly black man with disheveled silver hair and sharp eyes, appeared like an out-of-place shadow. He wore his old jacket and scuffed shoes, walking slowly, a stark contrast to the extravagance around him. The automatic glass doors slid open, soft music, and the scent of expensive cologne filling the air. Employees in sleek black vests turned to look, their gazes a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Well-dressed, affluent customers, discussing supercar prices, paused, eyeing Henry up and down. Ethan Brooks quickly clocked this unusual visitor. With years of experience, he was sure he could spot a real buyer instantly. An old black man in tattered clothes, moving slowly. Surely he couldn't afford anything here. Probably wants a photo to show his friends, Ethan thought, smirking and winking at a nearby employee. Amused glances quietly spread through the showroom. The air grew tense. Curious looks turned to doubt and derision. Ethan froze at Henry's calm response, but his contempt only sharpened. He chuckled, eyeing Henry up and down again. "This car, do you even know it's a limited edition, about $600,000? Not something just anyone can buy." Snickers rippled from the staff and customers, like invisible knives stabbing at Henry's dignity. But he stood firm, his smile serene. "I understand that, sir, but I'm genuinely interested and want to learn more." Ethan's lips tightened into a cold smirk, his voice harsher. "Sorry, sir, this car isn't for you today." Henry felt his heart clench, not from the rejection, but from the discrimination and scorn bearing down on him. Yet he stood there, resilient amid the probing stares from all sides. The showroom sank into silence, everyone waiting for his reaction, unaware that this moment would spark a chain of unexpected tense and emotional events. Henry quietly turned back to the Lamborghini once more, a symbol of power and luxury he wanted for Clara, the wife who'd stood by him through countless hardships. Ethan hadn't taken his eyes off him, his mind a jumble of irritation and suspicion at Henry's calm demeanor. To Ethan, those worthy of this world wore expensive clothes, flashy jewelry, and white skin, things Henry clearly lacked. He leaned in, whispering to a nearby employee loud enough for Henry to hear, "Since when did our dealership become a playground for delusional old men?" The soft laughter that followed was sharp and insulting. Henry Jackson stepped out of Prestige Auto Gallery, Atlanta's sunlight hitting his wrinkled face, highlighting his sad but resolute eyes. The glass doors closed behind him, Ethan Brooks' faint laughter and the scornful stares fading away, but the sting of humiliation lingered like a deep wound. He paused on the sidewalk, taking a deep breath to push down the rising anger. "It's okay, Henry," he whispered to himself, his voice trembling slightly. "Just a car dealership." But those self-soothing words couldn't mask the pain he'd just endured. Once again, he'd been treated as unworthy, all because of his skin and old clothes. Henry walked slowly to his beat-up sedan, a faded silver car his son Ethan had given him when he retired. His rough hands gripped the wheel as he drove to his modest home on Atlanta's outskirts, where ancient oaks cast shade and chirping birds offered his only comfort. But thousands of miles away, in a sleek Silicon Valley office, Ethan Jackson already knew. Lucas Reed, a young employee at Prestige Auto Gallery, and the only one who felt guilty, witnessing Henry's humiliation, couldn't stay silent. During his lunch break, Lucas pulled out his phone, his hands shaking as he dialed Ethan, a man he'd met at a Jackson Foundation charity event. "Mr. Jackson, I'm Lucas from Prestige Auto Gallery," he said, his voice hesitant. "I need to tell you what happened to your dad today." Ethan sat behind his expansive desk, his sharp black eyes narrowing as Lucas detailed everything. How Ethan Brooks ridiculed his father, refused him service, and kicked him out in front of everyone. "They said he didn't belong there," Lucas said, his voice thick with guilt. "I wanted to speak up, but I didn't have the guts." Ethan stayed silent, his hand clenching the pen so hard his knuckles whitened. Rage surged through him, not just at the insult to his father, but at the vivid memories of Henry's past injustices flooding back. Ethan remembered his Atlanta childhood, when his father worked himself to exhaustion in a garage to put him through school. Henry had shared stories of customers refusing him over his skin color, but he'd always smiled and told Ethan, "Son, don't let others' contempt define you. Your worth is right here." He tapped his chest, where his heart beat strong. That resilience and dignity had inspired Ethan to build his tech empire. Yet now, his father was treated as worthless in the very city he'd given his life to. "Lucas," Ethan finally spoke, his voice low and icy, "thanks for calling. I'll handle this." He hung up, stood from his chair, and walked to the window overlooking Silicon Valley's glowing lights. In his mind, a plan took shape, not for revenge, but to teach Ethan Brooks and Prestige Auto Gallery a lesson they'd never forget. He called his assistant, his voice clipped but resolute. "Prep the jet. I'm heading to Atlanta now, and bring the Rolls-Royce Phantom." Meanwhile, at the small suburban home, Henry sat with Clara, his eyes softening as she reminisced about their early days, when Henry fixed her father's car, and Clara brought him sandwiches to say thanks. "You're the best man I know," Clara said, her warm smile coaxing one from him in return. The next morning, Ethan Brooks had just brewed his favorite espresso, settling at his desk to savor the smug satisfaction of handling Henry Jackson the day before. To him, kicking out an old black man in a tattered jacket was a petty amusement, a way to flex his authority. But as he raised the cup to his lips, a low, powerful rumble echoed from afar, reverberating through the showroom's massive glass panes. The V12 engine's roar silenced the dealership. A glossy black Rolls-Royce Phantom, its paint shimmering like a deep lake, eased to a stop right outside the main entrance. Its presence exuded an overwhelming aura, drawing every eye in the showroom outward. Ethan Brooks set his coffee down, standing abruptly, his heart racing with excitement and curiosity. He knew this car's worth, a masterpiece over $1 million, reserved for the most powerful clients. William Hayes, the dealership owner, rushed out of his office, his face beaming as he prepared to greet the VIP. He clapped Ethan Brooks on the shoulder, whispering eagerly, "Ethan, we've got a big fish today. Only a handful of phantoms like this exist. Make it perfect." Ethan Brooks nodded confidently, adjusting his tie, and strode outside with William, both poised to cater to the powerful man in the Rolls-Royce. The car door opened slowly, and Ethan Jackson stepped out with a calm, commanding presence. He wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, his sharp black eyes radiating the aura of a man at the top. Ethan Brooks approached, flashing a friendly yet slightly obsequious smile. "Welcome to Prestige Auto Gallery. I'm Ethan Brooks, sales manager. It's an honor to have you today." William Hayes hurried behind, I'm William Hayes, the owner. We're thrilled to serve you." Ethan Jackson silently regarded the two eager men, his face betraying no emotion. His cold eyes lingered, stretching the tense moment before he spoke in a deep, forceful tone. "Gentlemen, I'm Ethan Jackson." At that name, Ethan Brooks' face drained of color, the coffee he'd sipped lodging in his throat. William Hayes froze, struggling to place why it sounded familiar. "Ethan Jackson, the tech billionaire," William muttered, his gaze shifting to Ethan Brooks with a mix of confusion and dread. Ethan Brooks tried to stay composed, forcing a strained smile to mask his rising panic. "An honor, Mr. Jackson," he said, his voice wavering. "May I ask what brings you to us this morning?" Ethan Jackson locked eyes with him, his stare colder than ever. He stepped past him, calmly surveying the showroom, then replied, his tone heavy with intent. "I'm here because of an unfortunate incident yesterday. Someone very important to me visited this place, but sadly, he didn't receive the welcome he deserved." Ethan's words sliced through Ethan Brooks like a blade. He flinched, his heart pounding, a bad feeling spreading through him. He stammered, trying to stay steady. "Mr. Jackson, may I know who you're referring to?" Ethan Jackson paused, turning to face him, his gaze icy. "The person I'm talking about is my father, Henry Jackson," he said, his voice low but resonant. "A simple old black man you refused to serve, mocked, and publicly insulted, just because of his skin and appearance." William Hayes stood stunned, staring at Ethan Brooks with a mix of shock and fury. Ethan Brooks felt like he'd turned to stone, his blood seeming to stop. Each of Ethan Jackson's words landed like a heavy blow, leaving him speechless. Ethan stepped deeper into the showroom, his voice ringing with authority and chill. "I'm not here today to buy a car. I'm here to settle some things with you, and I think you both know you've made a serious mistake." Ethan Brooks stood rooted, his mind blank as the man emerging from the Rolls-Royce Phantom wasn't the VIP he'd expected, but the embodiment of an unforeseen nightmare. In an instant he realized that his arrogance, contempt, and prejudice from yesterday had boomeranged back as an irreparable reckoning. But Ethan Jackson wasn't done. He turned, his cold gaze sweeping over Ethan Brooks and William Hayes, his voice cut like a knife. "My father has lived his whole life with dignity, overcoming countless hardships to raise me, yet yesterday, you treated him like he didn't belong here, just because of his old jacket and his skin." William Hayes stepped forward, trying to regain composure, his voice shaky. "Mr. Jackson, we're truly sorry. This will be handled seriously." But Ethan cut him off, his eyes piercing, leaving no room for excuses. "Empty apologies can't erase what you've done. This isn't just about reputation or business. It's about morality, how you treat people." He paused, his stare drilling into Ethan Brooks, who stood petrified, pale with shame and fear. "Mr. Brooks," Ethan continued, his voice low and firm, "the way you dismissed my father wasn't just thoughtless. It reflects a deep-seated societal illness, prejudice we must end." William Hayes, dealership owner, kept wiping sweat from his brow, scrambling for a defense to lighten the situation. But Ethan gave them no escape from the consequences. Standing amid the lavish showroom, he was a quiet storm, his voice calm yet commanding. "You think this ends with an apology? No. I don't just want you to see your mistake. I want you to understand the responsibility to change." Henry Jackson stood quietly behind his son, hands in the pockets of his worn jacket, his eyes calm but carrying a wordless resolve. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone reminded Ethan Brooks of what he'd done. Ethan Jackson stepped closer, locking eyes with Ethan Brooks, his voice cold but meaningful. "My father taught me a man's worth isn't in his looks or status, but in how he treats others. Yesterday, you failed that test, Mr. Brooks. Today, I'm giving you a chance to redo it." Ethan Brooks looked up, his eyes a mix of confusion and fear. "Mr. Jackson, what do you mean?" he asked, his voice trembling, clinging to his last shred of pride. Ethan Jackson gave a faint smile, not to comfort, but to underscore his power. "You and Mr. Hayes will spend time working at the Jackson Foundation. My family's charity in Atlanta, he said, his tone steady but unyielding. There, you'll learn to see people for real, not by their clothes or skin, but by their compassion and effort. William Hayes flinched, trying to object. Mr. Jackson, I understand the gravity here, but we have a dealership to run. We can't. Ethan cut him off instantly, his gaze sharp as a blade. Can't, Mr. Hayes. If you don't meet this demand, I guarantee Prestige Auto Gallery won't have a chance to work with any major clients in my network, and I'm sure you know how far my influence reaches. William swallowed hard, nodding reluctantly, realizing there was no way out. Ethan Brooks just bowed his head, his once arrogant air dissolving into undeniable shame. The next day, Ethan Brooks stepped into the Jackson Foundation, a charity center in Atlanta's outskirts, where low buildings and red dirt roads starkly contrasted Prestige Auto Gallery's glitz. He wore a plain shirt, sleeves rolled up, but his face betrayed his reluctance. Children's laughter echoed from a distant playground, the smell of old paint and motor oil hanging in the air, sounds and scents alien to his polished life. Sarah Evans, the foundation's manager, a middle-aged woman with a stern yet warm gaze, greeted him with a firm handshake. "Welcome to the Jackson Foundation, Mr. Brooks," she said, her tone free of mockery, but enough to make him squirm. "I've been told you'll be here for a while. We've got plenty to do." Ethan Brooks nodded curtly, his eyes darting away, as Sarah led him through the auto repair area, where poor teens learned to dismantle engines under volunteer guidance. A 16-year-old Jamal Carter stood by an old bicycle, his greasy hands working as his eyes gleamed at the parts before him. Sarah introduced him. "This is Jamal, one of our trainees. He dreams of being an auto engineer, but his family can't afford college." Ethan Brooks glanced at Jamal, saying nothing, but inwardly keeping his distance. This kid was no different from Henry Jackson in his eyes, poor and out of place. Sarah assigned Ethan Brooks his first task: help Jamal fix the bike he'd been working on. "I'm not a mechanic," Ethan protested, his voice edged with irritation. Sarah smiled faintly. "You don't need to be, Mr. Brooks. Just listen and assist. That's all we ask." Ethan grudgingly sat beside Jamal, clumsily gripping the wrench the boy handed him. Jamal looked at him, curious, but not hostile. "Ever fixed anything before?" he asked innocently. Ethan shook his head, replying brusquely, "No, I sell cars. I don't fix them." Jamal nodded, unbothered by Ethan's coldness. He started talking about his dream, working in the auto industry, building cars the world would know. "But my family's got no money," he said, his voice dipping. "So I learn here, bit by bit." Ethan Brooks stayed silent, his hands slowing as he absorbed Jamal's story. An unease crept in, not from the boy's poverty, but from how it echoed Henry Jackson, the man he'd mocked without hesitation. Sarah watched from afar, her gaze discreet. She knew he didn't want to be here, but she saw potential for change, the hope Ethan Jackson had when sending him. Meanwhile, Ethan Jackson sat in his office, checking emails from Lucas Reed, who reported that Henry had received the Lamborghini Aventador SVJ Roadster. Ethan quietly bought through another employee, not Ethan Brooks. At the center, Ethan Brooks bent over, watching Jamal carefully tighten a bolt on the old bike. For the first time, a flicker of hesitation shone in Ethan's eyes. Had he ever truly understood the worth of people like Jamal, or Henry Jackson? Jamal Carter, the 16-year-old with perpetually greasy hands and clear eyes, now worked alongside Ethan daily. At first, Ethan kept his distance, doing only what Sarah Evans assigned, saying little. The wrench in his hand felt foreign, an oddity to fingers used to signing deals or typing on keyboards. Simple tasks like tightening bolts or removing wheels became real challenges. Still, Jamal didn't mind. He quietly guided Ethan, step by step, with a patience rare for a teenager. "You're doing good," Jamal smiled encouragingly, after Ethan fumbled through a task. Ethan just nodded slightly, his eyes still detached, as if the boy were merely a duty he had to bear. But over days, Curiosity stirred in Ethan. Jamal wasn't just a poor kid with lofty dreams. He shared stories of his family, his mom a janitor, his dad gone early from illness, and nights under a dim lamp, studying engines from borrowed library books. "I want to be an auto engineer," Jamal said, his eyes blazing as he watched the bike take shape under his hands. "I want to build cars the world knows, but I know it's not easy." Ethan stayed quiet, but inside an unease grew, not from Jamal's hardship, but from how his persistence reminded Ethan of Henry Jackson, whom he'd ridiculed without a second thought. One afternoon, as golden sunlight filtered through the oak trees outside the Jackson Foundation, Jamal suddenly asked, "Why are you here if you don't like us?" The boy's candid question stopped Ethan cold, the wrench slipping from his hand and clanging on the ground. He looked at Jamal, whose eyes held no malice, just pure curiosity. Ethan sighed, for once not responding with ice. "I didn't choose to be here," he said, his voice low. "I was forced to come." Jamal tilted his head, pressing. "Forced for what?" Ethan hesitated, Henry Jackson's image in that worn jacket flashing vividly in his mind. He turned away, silent, but Jamal's question pierced his pride like a blade. That night, in his sleek Atlanta apartment, Ethan Brooks couldn't sleep. He stood at the window, gazing at the city's glowing lights, but his mind drifted to Jamal's words, and Henry Jackson's steady gaze that day at the showroom. He recalled mocking him, calling him a dreamy old man, and kicking him out of Prestige Auto Gallery like he didn't belong. Now, thinking of Henry's patience, his calm amid insults, Ethan felt a deep shame he'd never faced before. He wondered, if Henry Jackson didn't deserve to step into my dealership, do I deserve to be there? The next day at the Jackson Foundation, Ethan began to shift. He dropped his coldness with Jamal. When the teen asked him to hold a wheel for reassembly, Ethan focused harder, even asking, "Where'd you learn this stuff?" Jamal grinned, replying, "Books. The older guys here, and messing around myself. No one taught me directly, but I don't give up." Jamal's words hit Ethan Brooks again. He looked at the boy differently, no longer with disdain, but with a hint of admiration mixed with regret. Meanwhile, at the modest Atlanta home, Henry Jackson received a surprise from Ethan Jackson, the fiery red Lamborghini Aventador SVJ Roadster, delivered via Lucas Reed, the young employee who'd tipped Ethan off. Henry stood before the car, his hands trembling as he touched its glossy finish. Clara stood beside him, her smile radiant as she said, "Henry, this is your dream." Henry nodded, but he knew it wasn't just a gift, it was his son's affirmation that he deserved the best, something Ethan Brooks never grasped that day. Back at the Jackson Foundation, Ethan Brooks started feeling a change within. One afternoon, as he and Jamal finished fixing the bike, the teen looked up, asking, "You think I can do it? Become an engineer?" Ethan met his eyes, answering with rare sincerity, "If you don't give up, I believe you will." Jamal beamed, and that smile warmed Ethan in a way his years of arrogance never had. That night, Ethan sat at his desk, pen in hand, writing a letter to Henry Jackson. "Dear Mr. Jackson," he began, "I don't know how to fix what I did that day. I was wrong to judge you by your appearance, to mock and insult you. Working at the Jackson Foundation showed me a person's true value isn't what I thought. I sincerely apologize." He folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, feeling lighter yet still burdened, knowing this apology was just a start. Ethan Jackson got a text from Sarah Evans. "Ethan Brooks is changing, but he's got a ways to go." Ethan smiled, knowing his plan was on track. The Jackson Foundation Gala unfolded at the Grand Regency Hotel, with over 300 guests, business people, philanthropists, and volunteers, gathered to celebrate the charity's efforts supporting poor teens passionate about cars. Ethan Jackson stood on stage, his dark gray suit hugging his tall frame, his sharp eyes warm as he scanned the crowd. Beside him, Henry Jackson stood quietly, his old jacket replaced by a simple but elegant suit Clara had picked. His eyes glowed with pride for his son, though he felt a touch shy before the audience. Ethan Brooks sat in the front row near the stage, clutching the unsent apology letter he'd written to Henry. After weeks at the Jackson Foundation, he was no longer the arrogant man who'd mocked Henry at Prestige Auto Gallery, but he felt nervous, weighed down by knowing tonight he'd face the man he'd wronged. Jamal Carter, the teen he'd bonded with at the foundation, sat beside him, wearing a new shirt from Sarah Evans, his eyes bright as he looked up at the stage. Ethan Jackson began his speech, his voice booming through the mic. Tonight, we're here to honor those who've overcome hardship to chase their dreams. The Jackson Foundation isn't just about material aid. It reminds us of the true value of compassion and respect. He paused, glancing at the audience, then continued, "But I want to share a story about a mistake and redemption. Not long ago, my father, Henry Jackson, was denied and insulted at Prestige Auto Gallery, just for his simple appearance and skin color." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Ethan Brooks, who bowed his head, his hands crumpling the letter. Ethan Jackson faced his father, his voice softening. "Dad, I'd like you to speak." Henry stepped to the mic, his breath shaky, as he faced the crowd. He spoke slowly, his voice warm and strong. "I've lived long enough to face scornful looks and rejections, just for who I am. That day at Prestige Auto Gallery, I wasn't angry. I was sad, but I believe anyone can change, given a chance." Henry's words spread through the room like a warm breeze, touching many. Ethan Jackson placed a hand on his father's shoulder, then continued, "After that, I required Mr. Ethan Brooks and Mr. William Hayes to work at the Jackson Foundation, not to punish, but to teach them a person's worth isn't in looks or status." He looked at Ethan Brooks, his gaze no longer cold, but expectant. "Tonight, I'd like to hear from Mr. Brooks." Ethan Brooks stood, his legs trembling, as he climbed the stage. The room hushed, all eyes on him. He took a deep breath, his voice hoarse, as he began. "Mr. Jackson, both Ethan and Henry, and everyone here, I don't know how to undo my mistake. That day I mocked Mr. Henry, refused him, because I thought he didn't belong in my world. I was wrong, terribly wrong." He paused, his eyes finding Henry, a few steps away. "Working at the Jackson Foundation showed me what I never understood. Jamal, a poor kid with big dreams, taught me persistence and kindness outweigh any deal I've signed. Mr. Henry, I'm sorry, not just for what I said, but for not seeing the real you." Ethan Brooks bowed his head, his voice breaking. "I hope you can forgive me." Henry stepped forward, placing a hand on Ethan Brooks' shoulder, his eyes gentle but firm. "Everyone makes mistakes, Mr. Brooks," he said, his voice warm, "but what matters is daring to fix them. I forgive you." The room erupted in applause, not just for Ethan Brooks' apology, but for Henry's grace, a living lesson in compassion. Ethan Jackson smiled faintly as he returned to the mic. "I truly value this change," he said, his eyes sweeping the crowd. "But let me clarify that Prestige Auto Gallery only received a partial contract with my company. A reminder that honor can't be bought." In the back row, William Hayes bowed his head, knowing the cost of arrogance couldn't be settled in one night. As the gala ended, Henry and Clara stood together by the exit, their eyes following Ethan Brooks, chatting with Jamal, near the buffet. Clara squeezed Henry's hand, whispering, "You were right to forgive." The next morning, sunlight streamed through the showroom's tall glass, lighting the space like a fresh start. Ethan stood before the staff, those who'd laughed when he'd brusquely ejected Henry. Gone was his usual smugness. His voice was steady and sincere. "We were wrong. I was wrong. Judging people by appearance or prejudice is a grave mistake, and that mistake can't continue." The room stayed quiet. Staff exchanged glances, some surprised, but none objected. At the back, William Hayes nodded silently, though inwardly he fretted over Prestige Auto Gallery's reputation and profits, especially after Ethan's public gala statement limiting their contract. Ethan Brooks didn't stop at words. He proposed a new training program at the dealership, focusing on shifting attitudes and service policies. From now on, every customer who walks in here is treated equally, he said, his gaze resolute. No matter their clothes, skin, or status, we sell cars, but first, we serve people. He brought in Sarah Evans from the Jackson Foundation to train the staff, sharing the real lessons he'd learned there, about respect, compassion, and each person's value. Within weeks, Prestige Auto Gallery began to transform. Staff who once wore cold expressions now greeted customers with warm smiles. A middle-aged man in work clothes came in asking about a Bentley. Instead of being turned away, Lucas Reed, the young employee who'd tipped off Ethan Jackson, showed him around with enthusiasm. A simple black family stopped by to see a portion. They were invited to sit, offered coffee, and discussed options for their budget. The showroom was no longer just for the elite. It became an open space where everyone felt welcome. Ethan Brooks didn't just change the dealership. He kept working weekends at the Jackson Foundation, growing closer to Jamal Carter than ever. One afternoon, as they fixed an old car engine donated to the foundation, Jamal looked up, asking, "Mr. Brooks, you think I can make it? Be an engineer?" Ethan paused, meeting his eyes, a rare smile breaking through. "Jamal, I don't just think you can. I know you will, and if you need any help, I'm here." Jamal beamed, his greasy hands gripping the wrench like a promise to himself. William Hayes, though initially reluctant, began backing the change. He realized Prestige Auto Gallery's reputation rested not just on sales, but on how the community saw them. He partnered with the Jackson Foundation, funding a small scholarship for poor teens passionate about cars, inspired by Jamal's story. "We can't undo the past," he told Ethan Brooks in a meeting, "but we can build a better future." Ethan nodded, feeling for the first time that he and William were aligned on something bigger than profit. Meanwhile, at the modest Atlanta home, Henry Jackson and Clara enjoyed quiet days with the Lamborghini Aventador SVJ Roadster. One morning, Henry drove Clara along country roads, the wind tousling her silver hair, making her laugh like she was young again. "Henry, did you ever think we'd have this day?" Clara asked, holding his hand tight. Henry smiled, his eyes shining with simple joy. "No, Clara, but I knew we deserved it," he replied, his voice warm. The car wasn't just Ethan's gift, it was a symbol of the dignity he'd held onto his whole life. Ethan Brooks stood on Prestige Auto Gallery's balcony, watching a growingly diverse crowd, from wealthy suits to humble workers in old tees. He recalled Henry Jackson's gala words, "Everyone makes mistakes, but what matters is daring to fix them." Those words were no longer just a phrase, they were his new life's compass. He returned to the Jackson Foundation on weekends, not out of obligation, but because he wanted to help kids like Jamal turn dreams into reality. Sarah Evans, from the Foundation's office, texted Ethan Jackson, "Ethan Brooks isn't just changing, he's leading change." Ethan, in his Silicon Valley office, smiled at the message. He knew his plan had worked, not just teaching Ethan Brooks a lesson, but sparking a ripple effect from Prestige Auto Gallery to the broader community. He thought of his father, the humble man who'd inspired it all, and felt at peace. Prestige Auto Gallery was no longer just a luxury dealership. It became a symbol of change, where compassion and respect took precedence. Ethan Brooks, once the most arrogant man in that room, now guided a new future, one he'd learned from Henry Jackson, Jamal Carter, and his own heart. Days after Prestige Auto Gallery's shift, Atlanta seemed to glow anew in Ethan Brooks's eyes. He stood on the dealership's balcony, watching a varied crowd pass through the glass doors, from business people in pricey suits to workers in faded tees. Soft music still played in the showroom, but now the space wasn't the elite's domain. It welcomed all, with compassion and respect trumping looks or status. Ethan smiled faintly, gripping the railing, feeling a peace he'd never known in his arrogant years. At the small Atlanta Galway home, Henry Jackson sat in the garage beside the fiery red Lamborghini Aventador SVJ Roadster Ethan had gifted him. He didn't drive it often. To Henry, it wasn't for show, but a symbol of what he'd overcome. One afternoon, he brought his 10-year-old grandson to the garage, the boy's eyes wide with excitement. "Grandpa, can I sit in it?" he asked eagerly. Henry laughed, opening the door and lifting him into the passenger seat. He started the engine, its powerful roar echoing as the boy cheered. Henry drove around country lanes, the wind rushing through, carrying their laughter. Clara watched from the porch, her smile bright as she saw her husband's simple joy. Meanwhile, Ethan Brooks kept up his weekends at the Jackson Foundation. He no longer came under duress, he wanted to stay. Jamal Carter, the teen who'd taught him perseverance, became an indispensable partner. One day, as they finished an old car engine together, Jamal looked up, asking, "Mr. Brooks, did you ever think you'd be here?" Ethan paused, meeting his gaze, replying warmly, "No, Jamal, but I'm glad I am." Jamal grinned, his greasy hands clutching the wrench, his eyes shining with belief that his engineering dream was closer than ever. Prestige Auto Gallery wasn't just a luxury dealership anymore, it became a model for change. William Hayes, seeing the training program Ethan Brooks led bear fruit, deepened ties with the Jackson Foundation. He funded more scholarships for poor teens, naming it the Henry Jackson Scholarship, to honor the man who started it all. "We're not just selling cars," William told staff in a meeting. "We're building a community." Lucas Reed, who'd alerted Ethan Jackson, became Ethan Brooks's assistant, helping ensure every customer was treated fairly. Ethan Jackson, from his Silicon Valley office, got Sarah Evans' update on Prestige Auto Gallery and the Jackson Foundation's progress. "Ethan Brooks isn't just changing, he's inspiring," Sarah wrote. Ethan smiled, setting the report down, gazing out at the tech lights. He thought of his father, the simple man who'd sparked it all, and felt pride swell. He picked up the phone, calling Henry, his voice soft. "Dad, I'm proud of you." Henry, on the other end, chuckled. "Son, I'm proud of you too." Ethan Brooks stood before his apartment mirror one evening, seeing a face less haughty than before. He recalled Henry Jackson's gala words, "Everyone makes mistakes, but what matters is daring to fix them." That was now his life's guide. He pulled the apology letter to Henry from a drawer, reread it, and set it on the table, as a reminder of his journey. He wasn't the man who'd mocked Henry at Prestige Auto Gallery anymore. He'd become better, thanks to Henry, Jamal, and the Jackson Foundation's lessons. One day, Ethan Brooks returned to the Jackson Foundation, bringing Jamal a small gift, a shiny new tool set he'd bought himself. "For your start," he said, handing it over. Jamal hugged him, his voice thick. "Thanks, Mr. Brooks, I won't give up." Ethan patted his shoulder, his eyes bright with faith that Jamal would succeed, and he'd be there to see it. The story of Henry Jackson, Ethan Brooks, and Ethan Jackson vividly reflects issues still present in today's U.S. society, especially racial bias and prejudice based on appearance, while offering a profound lesson on change and compassion. In the tale, Henry, a humble black man, was ousted from Prestige Auto Gallery by Ethan Brooks for his worn jacket and skin, a scenario not unfamiliar in the U.S., where recent studies show black individuals still face unfair treatment in commercial spaces, from luxury stores to restaurants. Ethan Jackson's arrival, with a Rolls-Royce, and demand that Ethan Brooks work at the Jackson Foundation highlight the power of family unity and social responsibility, something Americans today can emulate to confront injustice. Ethan Brooks' transformation, from an arrogant man mocking Henry to a leader reforming the dealership through lessons from Jamal, a poor teen, shows prejudice isn't fixed. It reminds us that in the U.S., where diversity is strength, anyone can change if they open up and listen, like Ethan Brooks did to Jamal's dream of becoming an auto engineer. The practical lesson is don't judge others by looks, as Henry was dismissed, but seek their stories. A core U.S. value of second chances. Act like Ethan Jackson, using your influence for change, and like Henry, hold forgiveness to heal societal wounds. Don't forget to subscribe to catch moving stories like Henry and Ethan's journey. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video to explore more lessons on compassion.